Hello, and welcome back to The Kevin Roberts Show. I'm Larry O'Connor. This week, we're doing a little something different. It's Thanksgiving week. You may have some time off work or need some extra listening as you work on your Thanksgiving feast, so we're going to give you some additional content and something else to be thankful for: the rising tide of common sense conservatism around the world. Today's episode features remarks delivered by Dr. Kevin Roberts earlier this month in Lisbon at the Transatlantic Conservatism in the Age of Trump conference hosted by Instituto Trezeno. In these remarks, Dr. Roberts explores one of the defining debates of our time: the clash between globalist institutions and the renewed movement for a national sovereignty across the West. You'll hear why conservatism must be grounded in each nation's own culture, interests, and identity, and how globalist elites who claim to act on behalf of the world have often failed the very citizens they were meant to serve. And ultimately, you'll hear the case for a renewed, citizen-focused conservatism, not as a reaction to globalism, but as a real alternative, one capable of rebuilding strong nations and restoring the foundations of the West. With that, we hope you enjoy these remarks from Lisbon. Let's jump in.
What an honor to be with you tonight. I want to thank Teresa for her wonderful comments. How about another round of applause for Tour de Force? Thank you. Miguel and Instituto Trezeno, thank you so much for hosting this, for all of the work that you do, but also for the promise that you offer for Portugal and free people. Thank you. And last but not least, Luis, thank you for your own role in helping to organize this and for your wonderful opening comments. I'm going to start my formal comments with an observation. I was trained as an American historian, yes, but an American historian at a history department at the University of Texas that focused on transatlantic history. And I've long wanted to be in Portugal because of its history in that world. And that history, of course, is our present and also our future. But the real observation that I want to make as I begin some reflections on where we go from here as a people of the West is on time and on place. Two things historians are kind of infatuated by. It strikes me that it's the 11th day of the 11th month, a day we mark not only in Europe and in the United States, but around the world as the day when the fighting ended, an event that was the war to end all wars. And while we have some analysis about where we go from here over the last 100 years, it's important to stop and reflect in gratitude, which is the heart of conservatism, for the men who gave their lives in that conflict, the Second World War that followed, all of the conflicts since, but especially for our veterans, men and women in uniform here on your continent and on ours. In the United States, we call this Veterans Day, and it is a tremendous celebration for their sacrifice. And of course, intrinsic in that sacrifice of a military man or military woman is honor. But if you ask them why, they would tell you to the person, because of love of nation, which is a way of saying, for academics, a love of sovereignty, a love of self-governance. Two very related attributes, civic virtues, if you will, permanent things that bind the West, and especially my country, the United States, and yours, Portugal. Thinking about location, it's impossible, standing in this room, not to observe the importance of place, this very palace, where in 1640, your countrymen began an act of reclaiming sovereignty. And so I'd like to use those two facts, time and location, to frame the comments that I've prepared tonight. And I can tell you on behalf of my colleagues at Heritage, and whether those here, but also all of them back in Washington, and for that matter around the world, doing the Lord's work, that we love your country, we love your institute, we love where things seem to be going. We know we have a lot of work ahead. So the first thing to say about our topic tonight, Transatlantic Conservatism in the Age of Trump, is that to be successful, each nation's own conservatism must put its own nation first. It must be grounded in its own distinct national culture, its own history, its own identity, and put at the service of its own sovereign citizens. You and I know that that claim, which is so common sense, is heresy. Heresy to elites on both of our continents. Mostly on the left, but also, we must acknowledge respectfully, a few on the right, who fancy themselves citizens of the world. The nationalist populist conservatism surging across the West today is smeared by elites, even as we gather here, as close-minded, intolerant, and backward. But I submit these charges are not only false, they represent what psychologists call projection. For the record shows, with increasingly tragic clarity, that it is the elite ideology of globalism that is actually guilty of those very pathologies. Contrary to elite opinion, national interest and citizen sovereignty are not obstacles to peace, prosperity, and progress. They're the only soil in which those aspirations can take root and from which they can durably grow. And so they must be at the center of successful conservatism in this age of Trump, in Europe, in the United States, and everywhere else. They are certainly at the core of President Trump's most successful initiatives, and they are how conservatives of the so-called new right can rescue the West from both the Marxist left and the globalist establishment, at home and abroad. Before looking at conservative successes and opportunities today, we should first appreciate just how complete the Western elite's 35-year experiments with globalism and supranationalism have failed. Think back to the 1980s and 90s, the end of the Cold War and the dawn of what President George H.W. Bush called the New World Order. Remember what we were promised: peace, shared prosperity and mutual respect, freedom and democracy, justice and equality. To the working families who make up the lion's share of citizens of Western nations, globalism failed to deliver on all of the above. It did not prevent wars in Ukraine, Iraq, and the Balkans. In many ways, globalism stoked them. It caused the migration crises, destabilizing Western nations on both sides of the Atlantic. Unilateral free trade, with China in particular, cost us jobs, wages, industries, and more political and industrial espionage than we'll ever know. Globalist institutions, such as the United Nations, the European Union, NAFTA, and the World Trade Organization, have weakened the sovereignty, independence, and economic resilience of member states. These institutions were created by strong, independent, sovereign democracies and then betrayed them. A textbook example of this rot is the United States Agency for International Development. USAID was created in 1961 to establish foreign aid as a permanent tool of U.S. diplomacy. It primarily funded programs to improve healthcare, agriculture, education, and infrastructure in poor countries. The aid was certainly humanitarian, but that's not why we gave it. USAID, and U.S. foreign aid generally, was a strategic lever for checking Soviet communism in the developing world. Like the Marshall Plan and NATO, USAID served other countries' interests, but we founded and funded them for ours. It was in our interests to help rebuild Western Europe. It was in our interests to deter Soviet aggression. It was in our interests to keep anti-American ideologues out of Africa, out of Asia, out of South America. USAID's mission was to build allies. That clarity of purpose made these initiatives work. USAID wasn't welfare, in other words. It wasn't paternalistic. It was part of a nationalist strategy to protect America against violent, godless, global totalitarianism. When the Cold War ended, USAID lived on. Without a Soviet Union to resist, the agency was captured by the same kind of entitled left-wing mediocrities that took over our college faculties, our government bureaucracies, and our corporate media newsrooms. They twisted USAID into an instrument of left-wing culture wars. The agency promoted abortion, the LGBT agenda, and gender-affirming care, DEI, climate extremism, and anti-American, anti-free enterprise propaganda. It wasted tens of billions of dollars on duplicative, irrelevant programs. In more recent years, it funded international NGOs who were encouraging and helping Central Americans to illegally immigrate to the United States, literally fueling with our own people's tax money our own migration crisis. The agency did not reflect the American people's values or serve America's interests. Everyone running the program knew it, and they were proud of that fact. Conservatives knew it too. In Congress, in several presidential administrations, and in organizations, I am proud to say, like the Heritage Foundation. We published our first report calling for the elimination of USAID in 1995. Even liberals knew the agency was broken. The Clinton administration tried to reform it. The Obama administration admitted that humanitarian aid to Afghanistan might have helped the Taliban. We know that over the years, USAID money ended up in the hands of terrorists in Gaza, in Syria, in Somalia, and Yemen. So when President Trump was elected last year, everyone in the conservative policy community wondered how he would deal with the agency's myriad problems. The president considered lots of options, no doubt. But ultimately, he chose, completely correctly, to cut the Gordian knot and eliminate it altogether. The immediate reactions were, as you might expect. The left gasped, the right cheered, and the media went on the attack. But despite the predictable attacks, the president delivered on this massive win, and he deserves our gratitude for it. Conservatives on both sides of the Atlantic, as we ask these wonderful questions about where we go from here, should remember this episode. We should study it and learn from it. Because the Trump administration's elimination of USAID is an object lesson in how nationalist, populist, conservative reform delivers outcomes promised but never achieved by the left and the establishment. At home and abroad, politically and culturally, economically and strategically, shutting down USAID was not a necessary evil, but an affirmative good. It is good for the United States, for instance, that our foreign aid programs don't facilitate illegal immigration, and that taxpayers don't promote Marxist, anti-American ideologies. It is good for the culture of Washington, D.C., what we affectionately call the swamp, that bureaucrats and publicly funded NGOs clearly understand they work for U.S. taxpayers, not the other way around. That might be something the European Commission could remember. It is good that government agencies know that they can, in fact, be shuttered, just like failing private enterprises. It is good that America's sovereign citizens recognize and understand that dysfunctional government programs indeed can be eliminated. It puts our national discourse on much better ground. Similarly, it is good for Western democracies to see that our decades-long drift left is not a one-way ratchet. President Trump, President Orban, Madam Ambassador, Brexit, President Millet, the populist movement spreading across this continent and ours and others, the elimination of USAID, like President Trump's securing of our border and ongoing remaking of our judiciary, show that sovereignty still exists if citizens and leaders have the courage and the will to assert it. Eliminating USAID is even good for the nations that used to receive America's supposed aid. They were not being treated like friends in need, but as guinea pigs for the experiments of utopian frauds. Like so many domestic welfare programs, the agency trapped developing nations into dependency. It also poisoned America's reputation in the developing world because the terrible ideas USAID promoted were as toxic to those in African, Asian, and South American countries as it is to us. For all progressives talk about colonialism and imperialism, leftist elites love nothing more than imposing their values on the developing world. Finally, eliminating USAID is good for the world because it puts the lie to the global left's hand-wringing about nationalism, populism, and the reassertion of citizen sovereignty. The fear that the approach known as America First would trigger international tension, competitiveness, and the zero-sum thinking that leads to strife has proven groundless. The evidence is clear. Globalist elitism, which was supposed to be a cure to international conflicts, has only exacerbated them. It was supposed to bring us together, but its core impulses, the centralization of unaccountable power, the erasure of national sovereignty and borders, religious intolerance, censorship, materialism, are tearing us apart. The lesson, therefore, of 2025 is that sovereignty not only can mitigate globalist dysfunction, it already is. As we like to say in Washington, we're winning and we're not tired of it. It is not a coincidence that it was President Trump, not a globalist establishment, Republican or Democrat, who secured the Abraham Accords and the ceasefire in Gaza, who dealt swiftly and decisively with Iran's nuclear program, who got NATO states to live up to their obligations. President Trump set aside the artificial abstractions of the rules-based international order and negotiated agreements that served the signatories' own interests. National interest clarifies international relations. Globalism muddles it. And the prioritization of sovereignty impels leaders to respect other countries' sovereignty as well. It's what enables nations to treat each other as equals on mutually agreeable terms. When Americans put America first, and Mexicans put Mexico first, and Canadians put Canada first, that helps the North American alliance. Of course, President Orban should put Hungary first. Of course, Prime Minister Montenegro should put Portugal first. And of course, Prime Minister Sanchez should put Spain first. Sovereignty does not inhibit peace, prosperity, and cooperation. Remember, the word international means between nations. Countries that transparently and unapologetically put their own interest first can unify and build trust at home and abroad in this increasingly distrusting era. The only thing citizen sovereignty threatens is the elite's sense of entitlement to money, power, and privilege. Here again, the shuttering of USAID makes the point. It led to none, literally none, of the terrible outcomes elites said it would. The United States has not turned its back on the world. We still provide foreign aid. It's just that under the current administration, everyone understands that aid is an investment by the American people in American interests. Abusing that money, funneling it towards globalist, anti-American, anti-Western causes simply no longer will be tolerated by the American people. Recipient nations and organizations understand they are partners. U.S. foreign aid is not charity. It comes with corresponding responsibilities to the United States, responsibilities set by us, not for us, by people we never elected. In both domestic politics and foreign affairs, the problem is the same. Globalist institutions have no real skin in the game. They are not threatened by war, terrorism, censorship, crime, open borders, unfair trade deals, cultural imperialism, family breakdown, or authoritarianism. Indeed, the last 35 years suggest they see those things as in their interests. The worse things get for the peoples of the West, the better they seem to become for so-called citizens of the world. The more problems we suffer, the more authority they usurp. The less democratic our governments, the more our citizens become their subjects. Globalist elites promise the West the world, but are only robbing the world of the West. From foreign aid to trade to immigration to the rule of law to fundamental questions of religion and morality, they have turned on the sovereign nations that gave them their authority in the first place. 3 decades into their ascent, we now know that for all globalism's flowery rhetoric, it is dysfunctional, intolerant, and corrupt. Principled, populist, national conservatism is not a mere reaction to globalism's failure, but a solution to it. It is how independent sovereign nations can build the peaceful and prosperous world all our people deserve. I began my comments reflecting on time and place. And I'm hopeful that those reflections will remind us that it is our heritage and our future as peoples of the West to reclaim our sovereignty, to reclaim our self-governance, and bit by bit, conference by conference, election by election, conversation by conversation, go re-seize and revitalize what is ours. Thank you, and God bless you.